Smith's brilliant and very special idea, because with this book club you can meet the author, and it's a club that's not dependent on just newly launched books, but it's about the books we've been wanting to read for some time, or the books that we have already read and love so much that we want to share them with you. We're lucky too, because we're launching with Louis de Bernières and his newest novel, The Autumn of the Ace, the culmination of a trilogy, but which, rest assured, can be read as a standalone. Louis is so famous, he hardly needs introduction, but I shall regardless, just in case there are one or two in the audience who are unfamiliar, or who have only just had the pleasure of reading him for the first time. Before I begin, welcome, Louis. Yay!
Thank you, Kelly. Nice to see you again.
Thank you hugely for joining us. And the last time we met was in Dalkey, and before that in Mandalay, as we've exchanged emails about Mandalay in happier times, or more hopeful times.
Yes.
So I am, forgive me, going to plagiarize from the Waterstones biog I found online, because I love how it opens. It says, immortalized as the creator of the best-selling global phenomenon, Captain Corelli's Mandolin, London-born Louis was listed as one of Granta's best young novelists in 1993. Known for his picaresque, immersive fiction, his first novels were a loosely connected sequence set in Latin America, starting with the brilliantly titled The War of Don Emanuel's Nether Parts. He has said of himself that he is one of those authors who's always trying to write war and peace, always looking to create that magnum opus. And I would say, though, that after 21 books, Louis, including one work of nonfiction I'm very much wanting to read, the Book of Job, an introduction, and 4 collections of poetry, that in fact, collectively, you have in your hand already a great body of work. And you're writing still, thank goodness for, all of us greedy readers who love everything you write. And I do believe, Louis, that you have indeed written a kind of British War and Peace, and with this latest trilogy, it's a testament, I think, to how vividly you portray your characters, that if you meet them at the end, as I did, then you want to know them at their beginning. A bit like getting to know somebody at the start of a love affair. Like, you want to know absolutely everything about them, and you want to know them, you want to be with them all the time. So I began with Autumn of the Ace, and then I reached immediately for The Dust That Falls from Dreams. And then the second one is So Much Life Left Over. Sorry, shamelessly plugging Louis de Bernières. And I've not yet finished them, but I shall be giving the entire set away to many friends and family for presents hence. So I've got lots of questions, and we have 2 people here participating with us tonight, our first night. We'll see how this goes. But I'm going to lead the discussion first, and then bring Matthew, who's in Notting Hill, and Lee's in. She's in Fulham. We're all going to start talking late, in a bit, and we'll see how it goes. So I have lots of questions, as I said, and I so wish we were sitting together at the Frontline Club having a martini or a glass of wine together. And, Frontline Club has the best fish and chips in town, and it's the best melanzane parmigiana in town as well. And I will be there straight away after the lockdown lifts. And the Frontline Club holds lots of fantastic events, both online and in situ, and I hope everybody at least goes onto their site or visits them when you're in town after the lockdown. So the great thing about Zoom, though, the kind of very faint silver lining of this whole pandemic, is that it allows people to join, allows more people to join us, right, than if we were just in situ. So that's good. So The Autumn of the Ace, as you might have guessed, this is for the people who haven't read the book yet, as you might have guessed from the title, tells the story of the last few decades of a person's life, so full of life, yet so full of memories. In this case, the central character is the eponymous First World War flying ace, Daniel Pitt. But throughout, we have other characters who have touched his life coming in and out of the story. The trilogy, which begins with The Dust That Falls from Dreams, opens with one of the main characters going off to the First World War and all the excitement surrounding that and the foreboding. So the character Ash, who goes off to war, says, every man who's never been a soldier regrets it when he gets old. So Ash's movements are full of vigor and purpose as he strides off, towards the battlefield into his, glorious future, we hope. But then, Louis, you juxtapose this almost immediately with his fiancée at church on her knees praying for him. Sorry, it kind of moves me, and she's weeping, and there's another woman beside her whom she doesn't know, and the woman reaches over and clasps her hand, and they just sit there together, praying for these boys. And then, Louis, when Ash says goodbye to Rosie, you have simply captured this like essential mood and the atmosphere of that moment. It's just brilliant. So, as I said, you have not just one novel, Louis, of war and peace, but three. And I'd say it could be titled Life and Love and War and All's Fair, rather than War and Peace. So I'm going to start with the questions now. And I want to go on to talk to you about war, because, the economics of war, the morality of war, the ethics of war, the vast graveyards of war, the horrors, the heroics, the nightmares, hence the loss and the glory and the passion. These novels are awash with it. War is a constant and sometimes quiet and other times loud in the background, kind of reverberating and sort of pulsing through these novels. And you give us all sides of it, Louis. I wonder, how much research you've had to do, a lifetimes, I imagine, and how much reading have you done around these books, with these books in mind, and how much traveling did you have to do to inform the way you've written this trilogy?
Well, the research begins with having been born at exactly the right time. My grandparents all went through the First World War. One of my grandfathers was maimed in an air crash. He was shot 2 or 3 times in Flanders. One of my grandmothers was a VAD, she worked as an amateur nurse, really. Another one deserted the Indian Army to join the British Army. And he's the Daniel Pitt character, really. And he ended up in the RAF, having quite accidentally, because he thought he was going to be a soldier, and he ended up in the Royal Air Force. And of course, so I grew up listening to the stories that my parents told about their parents. And of course, also listening to the stories that my parents had, because they went through the Second World War. My father in North Africa and Italy, and my mother in what was then Ceylon, as a controller of submarines. When feminism kicked in the 70s, she was very contemptuous. She said, "What do these women think they've ever done?" Well, she was controlling submarines. And I think because of those 2 world wars, people like me expected there to be a third one any minute. I used to count the number of years between 1918 and 1939 and work out when the next one was going to start. You're probably too young to remember, but my generation were all expecting to be annihilated in a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. And when the Berlin Wall came down, I remember sitting there actually crying, weeping, because it felt as though we had a future suddenly. It was extraordinary to have a future. So people were talking about the end of history. Well, if only. But also, I admired my father a great deal. My mother told me that he'd had a really good war. He'd come out of it well. And when I was very young, I wanted to follow in his footsteps and join the army. And they gave me a scholarship which paid my school fees. But I was only 15. And this was at the time of the hippie revolution. It was just starting. And by the time I was 18, I just wanted to play the guitar and lie around with girls with long hair. You know what I mean? The times had completely changed, but I still had to join the army because they paid my school fees. So I had several months in the army,
At
which in some ways, It's Sandhurst. In some ways, I enjoyed it. It was very educational. You certainly learn about what your limits are. But I'm not the kind of person who likes giving orders. At least I wasn't then. I'd be much better now. But I also hated taking orders, and I'm still like that. I don't want to be told what to do. You know, I would have been a really terrible officer. And in the end, I was persuaded to leave by a company sergeant major in the Irish Guards who said, look, we can't change you. All these other cadets, they're here because they want us to change them, but we can't change you, so you better do something else. And it was most fantastic advice. But as a result of that experience, it means I do, for example, know what it's like to spend all night in a trench on Salisbury Plain in the middle of winter. I know what it's like to fire a machine gun or throw a hand grenade. I understand comradeship in a way that I think most civilian writers never will, because it's a kind of love, a sexless love between people who are to get in the shit together. You can't understand that unless you had it, you know. So there's a whole area of love that I think I know about, which most other people wouldn't. So I've had a tremendous amount of material just from my own life. But secondly, my parents had a massive library of stuff about the Second World War, often to do with people that they'd known. My mother knew Blondie Hasler, who was a Cockleshell hero, for example. She knew Evelyn Waugh when he was in the Royal Marines. So I read all of that stuff and was deeply impressed by it, mostly by a novel called The Cruel Sea by Nicholas Monseret, which is about ordinary people facing the most terrible difficulties on the North Atlantic convoy, with sort of arbitrary and senseless death and injury and so on. And that book taught me how to write about violence. It's quite a big debt. I've never written about violence in such a way as to make it seem glamorous, I hope. Does that answer your question?
It does. I mean, my next question was going to be about Sandhurst, and
oh yeah,
but can I just ask, how did you get out of the? I mean, what did you just say? I'm leaving, or what happens?
No, it was very painful because my parents were incredibly disappointed. My father said to me, "You're going to be a failure all your life." And a few years ago, when he was about 90 years old, I said to him, "Do you remember saying that?" And he said, "Yes, but what I meant was, if you carry on like this, you'll be a failure all your life." So, and I was going to go into his old regiment. So he had the embarrassment of telling all his friends I wasn't coming. But yeah. No, I realized that that if I didn't quit, it was going to get really too painful and, you know, difficult to carry on. I mean, I was feeling quite self-destructive after a while. And so I went to see my company commander. He said, "Oh, you'll be a damn fine cavalry officer." And I thought, no, I won't. I went to see the general who commanded Sandhurst, and he was unfortunately an old friend of my father's. And in the end, what happened was that I had to pay quite a large amount of money to get out. It was the equivalent of a new motorcycle, which is quite painful for a young man, you know. I could have done with a motorcycle. And years later, my father handed over the file he kept on me. He said, "You're old enough to have this." And I found that the army had forced him to pay back all those school fees, which was a huge amount of money. And he never told me.
Wow.
He never told me. And so after the success of Captain Corelli, I rang up Lloyd's Bank and said, "Please, can you calculate what this sum of money would be now, accounting for inflation?" So they told me, and I sent my parents a check, and they went on a cruise.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. That's a nice story.
I managed to make up for the awful disgrace and dishonor and everything.
I mean, you do talk about, you know, you're talking about the cruel sea, and I mean that's a sort of another theme that runs through this is the kind of the all for nothing. Where is it? that you, yeah, it's the you know, war for nothing. What does it mean? I'll get to that question later. I can't find it now. So I want to say that the other books that you've written, I love that story about your. Do you have a box full of medals from your dad and granddad? And
I've got a cabinet full of medals upstairs, and it contains lots of lovely things, and also some tragic things. So, for example, I've got the medals of two great uncles who died in the Boer War in the early 1900s. I mean, really, a very, looking back on it, a war that seems almost senseless. But one of them died in an ambush, and the other died of basically died of what they used to call enteric fever. You know, dysentery. You shit blood until you die.
Yeah.
I've got them, their swords, and it's one of them. And I've got my great uncle Reggie's stuff as well. He was in the Indian Army on the Northwest frontier. He went through the First World War, and then they just dumped him in about 1930 because of defense cuts. And he spent the rest of his life living in a one-roomed slum in Brighton, with just becoming alcoholic and hopeless. I've got the inventory from his will. He left a couple of broken chairs in his will. But you know, I've got his sword and things, and it's actually about 6 inches shorter than it should be because it had so much use.
So is this Archie's sword?
That's Archie, yes, my Uncle Reggie. He died before I was born, but I always feel that I know him very well. Yeah,
to let the audience know, there's a character, one of the characters in the book, he has a sword that was, you know, so used and so polished and so, you know, sharpened that it was 6 inches, right? Shorter than it should have been, and he dies, and spoiler alert, kind of tragic death, but the death takes Daniel on this sort of journey of you know, of memories, to take his brother back to Peshawar to bury him, right? And then he goes to South Africa as well, and you know, you see Daniel revisiting the past and then moving on to the future because he still has so much life to live. So the other books that you've written, I mean, some of the notwithstanding stories and A Partisan's Daughter find their way into Autumn of the Ace. I haven't read so much left over yet, so I couldn't say. But it's almost as if with these books, you know, you were kind of warming up to this magnum opus, and it was as if you were working slowly, you know, towards the development of the trilogy, and like, you know, revisiting people and places, like in the different guises, and trying on this sort of, finding a treasure chest of costumes and trying them on and seeing which one worked. Yeah. I've been thinking about this trilogy since the 1990s, when it emerged that my grandfather, who we thought had died and disappeared decades ago, well, he turned up dead in the Rocky Mountains at the age of 96. Oh my God!
I went to Canada to find out what on earth he'd been up to. And that was the origin of this whole book, this whole trilogy. And I was thinking about it ever since the 90s. And when I was writing when I was writing Birds Without Wings, I suddenly remembered that I had that Drusilla in Captain Corelli's Mandolin was originally a refugee from Turkey. And I thought, why don't I have Drusilla in this book? As it's a prequel to Captain Corelli. So Drusilla, I had two characters in two books. Sorry, one character in two books. And then I thought, why don't I carry on with this and have people, even if in tiny ways, turning up in each other's narratives. So in this new book, I've even got a character from my first novel, you know, Don Emanuel. And the intention of it really is that when I'm long gone and anybody gets around to studying what I wrote, they'll realize that I actually wrote one enormous novel and not however many it is. I'm trying to connect them all so they turn up to one vast narrative.
That's what I was trying to get to, you know, hint at, that, as I said, this great body of work collectively, you know, it is just, you know, one story. And then you have the story of the Yugoslavian,
Rosa, yeah.
dark-haired Yugoslavian who, yeah, I mean, shocking story, but and she's from the partisan's daughter, isn't she?
Yes, yes, she is.
Yeah.
And she's based on someone I shared a house with when I was in my early 20s.
Okay.
I lived in it was supposed to be hard to let because it had no roof, and it was run by Islington Cooperative Housing.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously everybody was desperate for these roofless houses that had such low rent. And a guy in one of these houses who I knew, called John Horrocks, decided he was going to go to India on the hippie trail. And I still got his enormous trainers that he left behind. So I took over his room pretending to be him. And in this house was a woman just like Rosa.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't her real name, but she was Yugoslavian. And she told me most of those stories.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And after I left the house, I thought, God, I must write these down before I lose her voice.
Mm-hmm.
So I did write them down. Mm-hmm. And about 7 versions, and 20 years later, they became a novel.
Yeah, I mean, I can't ask you I want to ask you something very much more personal that I can ask online on Zoom that will be, heard forever. So maybe when we get to the Frontline Club over drinks, I will ask you.
Okay, don't you're teasing me.
So I was once told by a rather famous publisher, Louis, that the best novels are blessed with a holy trinity: plot, setting, character, to which I since have added the magic sort of dust of dialogue. It's difficult to create, and which, if done well, enhances characterization and everything else. And when these are balanced, you have the perfect mix that allows the reader just to, lose themselves for hours in the story. And I was thinking of this when I read chapter 2 of The Dust That Falls from Dreams. It's called chapter 2, Edwardians. And my God, Louis, this is just magisterial with description. I mean, it's luscious, it's multi-dimensional, and you make the whole world come alive. It reminded me of Mayhew's London Labour and the London Poor. And then also, just one of the many other examples, your description of Peshawar in Autumn of the Ace. In one paragraph, you have managed, this rather brilliant abbreviation of its history, and again, setting the scene. And how did you learn how to write like this, Louis? It is an art. And before you answer, can you just read aloud the first 2 paragraphs from chapter 2 of Dust?
Oh. That's quite a lot of text.
It's not too bad. I did a sample myself. It doesn't take too long. And
okay.
People want to hear you.
Okay. My children don't. Okay. 12 years passed, years that would forever be remembered as golden by those who had taken part in Mr. and Mrs. McCosh's coronation garden party. One summer succeeded another, each, it seemed, hotter and more glorious than the one before. The roses thrived in the clay of the beds, the apples grew juicy and generous, the wasp traps made of jam and beer were set up in the boughs. In Court Road each summer evening could be heard the thud of tennis balls on the hollow clonking of croquet mallets. Out in the street, the ragamuffin children of the poor came up from Mottingham and played games of hide and seek, knucklebones, grandmother's footsteps, and kick the can. Sometimes they knocked on the doors of kitchens and asked for drinks of water, soon learning which maids were generous with sherbet and gingerbread men. Gardeners went out armed with buckets and fetched in the horse droppings for the roses. Gypsy women stopped ladies in the street and offered lucky white heather, with the clear implication that bad luck would ensue from refusal. Almost every day there came by the muffin man, the costermonger, the rag and bone man, the milkman, the cat's meat man, the fish carts drawn by enormous rangy dogs. Each tradesman had his own cry. Policemen strolled in pairs on their predictable circuits, armed only with whistles and koshes. In winter, the smoke from the fires, the factories, and the bonfires of leaves created yellow fog that choked the asthmatic and rolled inexorably down the street like vast waves. Once enveloped, one could see no further than the end of one's hand. People groped their way to the nearest door, knocked, and were given refuge. At eventide and dawn, the gaslighter came, and when it snowed, the gaslight on the pavement sparkled and danced. In the great houses of the bourgeoisie and the commercial parvenu, the servants provided the glue that held the social classes together or bridged the divide. As snobbish and as rule-bound as their employers, they became families within families, with their own intrigues, honors and dishonors, grand amour, hatreds and loyalties. Every house had its own rules. In some, the servants were treated almost like slaves, but in families such as the one in the Grampians, they were a natural part of its extended society. The one universal truth is that every family was terrified of losing its cook. Ladies lived with the perpetual anxiety of upsetting their cooks or having them poached by unprincipled dinner guests.
So tell me, Lee, I mean, how did this, I mean, when did you learn to write like this? How did you learn to write? Did you write short stories? Were you?
Well, I really don't know. I mean, my father wrote poetry, very good old-fashioned poetry with proper structure and rhyme and meter and everything. My mother was good at writing too. She wrote 2 little novellas. I had one of them published. I had a succession of wonderful teachers at school. One of them in particular he made us write a story every week. And he tried to make us write poetry and things as well. Mm-hmm. And I owe an enormous debt to him. He loved language and he loved literature. You know, it makes a huge difference if you've got a teacher like that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I had another teacher who was a really heavy duty modern intellectual, and another one who was an actor from the Royal Shakespeare Company, okay, who would act out all the parts in the plays that we did. Mm-hmm. You know, so one minute he was Othello strangling Desdemona, and the next minute he was Desdemona on the floor being strangled. Mm. And but I knew right from very, very early on that I was going to be a writer. I think probably from the age of 12, in the way that other people know they're going to be a doctor or a policeman or whatever. Mm-hmm. And but it was a long, long struggle before I wrote anything that I thought was, or anyone thought was worth reading. I mean, it took me until my early 30s. I had a lot of false starts in my 20s. And I was rather distracted by rock music as well. I sort of wanted to be a rock musician, but I eventually grew out of that. Mm-hmm. It's actually not much of a life. So I honestly, but probably the real answer to your question is no writer is, well, a writer is only a writer to the extent that they are a reader. Mm-hmm. So I've always been a voracious reader. I can get through a big novel in 2 or 3 days. Mm-hmm. I'm afraid there's about to be a distraction. So this is Podge.
Okay.
And she's a terrible attention seeker. And anyway, so whenever people tell me they want to be a writer, I say, well, are you a reader? What do you read? Because the sorts of things that you read will determine the sorts of things that you write. Mm-hmm. And of course, during my 20s, I was reading nothing but Latin Americans. Mm-hmm. So writers of really linguistically adventurous writers, mm-hmm, who also quite often had a quirky sense of humor. Mm-hmm. And when I began to write, it just came out pretty much exactly the same as the stuff I was reading. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It took me maybe 4 or 5 novels to sort of move away from that influence. Mm-hmm. And now my reading is much more Catholic. It's much more general, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And in a way, I regret it. But the thing is, your style has to develop. You can't keep writing the same novel over and over again. It's a bit tragic if you do that. That's why I'm never going to write another version of Captain Corelli, even though it's my biggest success.
Well,
if you don't move along, it's just a cop-out.
Mm-hmm.
The worst thing it's horrible when writers end up imitating themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You have to move on. You have to develop your style, and as you say, the readers want to see that evolution. Although there are some, look at the crime fiction writers; they write the same thing over and over, and there's a sort of endless appetite for that. But I love the way your writing has evolved over the years, and this will lead me to one of the questions I was going to ask you. When you were in your 20s. I mean, did you find a literary agent? Were you submitting to agents? Did you have the novel written? What was that process like? Because I love the stories of like Ian Rankin, for example, to talk about a crime fiction writer. I mean, I always tell my own writers that, he had 7 or 8 novels published before he became, an overnight sensation. So, I mean, what was your sort of story? Were you on dregs financially? Were you thinking, how did that work? What was the story of your novel submission and all that? Tell us the origin story.
Well, I finally wrote my first publishable novel when I was about 30-ish, in my early 30s. Mm-hmm. I had a motorcycle crash and smashed my right leg up, and I really couldn't move for 6 months. Mm-hmm. And my landlady was having an emotional breakdown, which made it scary to leave my room. And my Irish girlfriend didn't want to look after me, so she went back to Ireland. Mm. And I was very much on my own. I was working as a supply teacher, but in the evenings I was very much on my own and unable to go anywhere. But it was lockdown. Mm-hmm. And I found a short story I wrote when I was about 18 and freshly back from Colombia, as I had a year in South America. Mm-hmm. And I decided to write what happens next, and that became 3 novels. Okay. But the agent story is that I wanted to be a poet. Mm-hmm. And I had a friend at school called Ilse Sissons, mm-hmm. And I showed her my poetry, and she liked it a lot. She said, "You've got to publish this." And her husband was a literary agent, and she didn't want to pass me on to him, mm-hmm. because they'd divorced and she didn't really like him anymore. And so she passed me on to another agent that she knew. And this woman, Lavinia Trevor, mm-hmm. She got back to me. She said, "I don't like poetry. I don't read poetry. And there's no money in it. If you write some prose, send me that." Mm-hmm. So I sent her the first version of A Partisan's Daughter. And she said, "It's too short to be a first novel," and neither was it any good. And so then I had this experience of breaking my leg and writing this South American novel. Mm-hmm. And she took it straight away. She knew straight away who wanted it. Mm-hmm. She went straight to Dan Franklin and he offered for it, and I was just off like a rocket.
Yay. And did you quit work and that was it? I mean, or was it enough money then to quit work? Or?
I half quit work after my 3rd novel, mm-hmm. After Cardinal Guzman. Mm-hmm. Because I was in a very, very stressful teaching job working in a truancy centre. We had a school for school refusers, a totally bonkers idea. You can imagine what it was like. It was babysitting for lunatics. And, but they were very vulnerable kids. Mm. And so when I realised I was learning the same writing as I was by babysitting lunatics, I decided to leave, let somebody else have my job. Mm-hmm. But I carried on going in every week on Thursdays because it's very upsetting for those kinds of kids to have sudden changes. Sure. I was their sports teacher, so I carried on doing that until they'd all left. Mm-hmm. So that took another couple of years, I suppose, and then I was finally free. Mm-hmm. And looking back on it, it was a very stupid gamble. Mm. My mother was always saying, "Why didn't you get a PhD? You get a PhD." And there came a time, maybe after 20 years, and she was still saying, "Louis, you've got to get a doctorate." And I said, "I've got 4 or 5, and I didn't even have to work for them."
She sounds like an Asian mother. You know, why don't you get a real job?
Oh, she was. She was. Yes, she was always going on about my appearance. You know, I was too fat or too thin, or my hair was too long, or it was time I had a shave. Dreadful.
I think mothers do that in general. My mother used to say to me, please, Kelly, can you just at least brush your hair before you go out the door?
Well, now it's my daughter, Sophie. She's 13 and she just bullies all of us.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, speaking of this, I want to talk to you about relationships, Louis, and the intricacies of relationships. You know, some of your dialogue sounds real enough to have been lifted. Is it?
Not much.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you brought the subject of dialogue up, though.
Mm-hmm.
You brought it up earlier, and I wanted to come back to it.
Mm-hmm.
Dialogue is a fantastically good way, an economical way of doing characterization, doing character. It takes up a lot of space on the paper as well, so your book looks longer than it really is. And I've noticed from observing people conversing that they often don't actually answer each other point to point. Conversations loop. They will come back to things, you know. So or they become elliptical. And I try and make my dialogue like the dialogue that you have in real life, which is somewhat elliptical, where people are slightly off on their own train of thought rather than responding directly to what you say. So.
And the reader will fill in the gap, right? The reader can follow.
Yes. I used to know a writer called Lisa Sandorbin de Terran. I don't know if you remember her. But she was like me, the same generation. She wrote like a Latin American. And she once told me that she was so terrified of doing dialogue that there wasn't any in her novels at all. So you can actually, and it's true, I looked, you can get away with not doing dialogue, but I think it's so much easier to do characterization if you let the characters speak for themselves. Every writer says this. It's a cliche, but it's true. I mean, a lot of cliches are true. And it is a cliche that characters must be allowed to speak for themselves. And they'll often wreck your plot by doing and saying things you hadn't planned. And you just got, oh my God, it's happened again. You know, then you have to tweak the plot to accommodate them.
And also when you allow the characters to speak, it speeds up the pace of the narrative as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, there are things. There's one point where somebody's choking in one of my books. I think it's Captain Crowley's Mandolin. And the doctor says, and this person's complaining about choking. And the doctor says, if you can speak, you can breathe. And about a year ago, I said this to somebody who was choking. And she then read Captain Crowley's Mandolin and said, I know where you got that.
Yeah, but she's okay. She survived, obviously.
Yeah, she survived because she could breathe. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to speak.
Do you want to? I have lots of other questions. How are our two book club members? Would you two like to ask any questions yourself?
Well, I certainly would. But Lisa, please, if you want to go ahead. Awesome.
I do have a question, but you go first, Matthew.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thanks. Well, it's thank you, Louis. It's a real privilege to meet you, and thank you very much for what you've been sharing this evening, and Kelly for the chairing. I found your commentary around the legacy of war particularly striking, and I was thinking a lot about the intergenerationality of war and how the trauma can last well beyond a generation that actually went through the war itself. My hometown is Coventry, and I was very heavily bombed in the Second World War, and I've grown up thinking exactly the same thoughts as you described. What was the duration between the wars, and is that going to reoccur? And I wondered, when you say you're creating a long narrative through your work, are you doing that with that kind of intergenerational sense of trauma through the characterization and through the story?
I think I am, but probably not on purpose. My father wrote a long poem about the bombing of Coventry, about the new cathedral arising, you know, near the ruins of the old one. What you say is certainly true. So, for example, one of my grandfathers maimed himself crashing a Sopwith Camel in 1918. He was in such pain all his life that by the time he was 70, he couldn't take it anymore and he committed suicide. He blew his head off with a shotgun. That traumatized my mother, who never got over it. You know, she never forgave her brother for not intervening in time, and things like that. So that's a trauma that got passed on to my mother. My father lost all his comrades in one battle in Italy, 20 tanks in 5 minutes. He was the reconnaissance officer, and he'd reported to the general that the engagement must not go ahead because there were German guns up on the hills on both sides of the valley. It was a recapitulation of the charge of the Light Brigade. So he lost all his comrades in 5 minutes. He had to bury his best friend. And because of that experience, he became emotionally closed in a way that made it very, very hard for him to be a good father. He couldn't express his feelings. In fact, the older we got, as more time went by, the easier it got for him. So whereas when he was 30, he was 35, he was a very poor father. By the time he was 85, he was a really, really good one. But because of the way that he was a father, I sort of made up my own mind about how I should be one. You see what I mean? So the effects of the war just bounce along through the generations. And no doubt my son in turn will carry the burden of having had me as a father with my particular problems I inherited from mine. Do you see what I mean? So, yes.
Louis, you do write about that. I mean, you do show that also in the Autumn of the Ace with, you know, Daniel and Bertie.
Yes.
And his.
Well, yes, that was really me and my father. I took my father back to the battleground in Italy because I thought he needed to, lay some ghosts. And at the time, my mother and I were very tearful about the whole thing, and he was quite calm. But when he got back, he wrote about 5 poems in as many days about the whole thing.
Lise, you want to?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm really enjoying having this conversation about the intergenerational trauma of war, and of course, you know, your novels are so shot through with all the implications of that. It's something that I really enjoy. But I can't believe I'm saying this, but I want to say the B word, the Brexit word. Because Europe was the great peace project, and because so many people, you know, it became many other things, obviously, and I don't want this to turn into something that's black or white, but I'm just really interested to hear how you arrived at your feelings about Europe. Although, as I said, it was originally designed as a sort of the big peace project that would prevent the next generation from experiencing what we did and our parents and our grandparents.
Well, you're right in one way and wrong in another. I mean, when the European community was originally conceived, it was really conceived by Winston Churchill, and it was his plan to make perpetual peace in Europe. It started originally as an agreement about coal and steel, if you remember. So its original. When it actually got going, it was more about I think, protectionism, really. And I've always thought of the European Union, at least, let me put it this way. When I voted to go into it, what we were voting for was a free trade zone, which everybody thought was a good idea. So it was a political and economic project, rather than something about world peace and so on. What actually secured the peace all those years wasn't the EU, it was NATO. It was the military alliance between the USA and all of the European powers, which made it impossible for us to go to war with each other. I mean, even Greece and Turkey, who seem to be dying to go to war with each other all the time, they can't really because they're both in NATO. Because there's this agreement that if anybody attacks one of you, then you're all involved. You all have to pile in. And I think it was NATO that secured the peace. I think there's a sort of, and I was one of these people. I had romantic feelings about Europe, that it was a most wonderful brotherhood and sisterhood of people with so much in common who are going to go forward together. And that's because culturally speaking, I'm definitely European before being British or anything. My origins are French, clearly. I cook Mediterranean food for my children. I speak French pretty fluently and a few other languages quite badly. So culturally, I'm European. I'm just not politically or economically European. I think if you've been through two world wars for the right of small nations for autonomy, remember, we had to go into the First World War because Germany invaded France through Belgium and Luxembourg, which were two neutral countries. They pulled off the same stunt pretty much in 1939. And it was really about the right of small nations to self-determination. And having convinced ourselves of that, we divested ourselves of our empire, if you think about it, because we suddenly realized it was hypocritical to have one. I think I'm rambling here a bit.
Well, this leads me back
yes.
to Louis. I have an author, for example. She's had a debut work of fiction in translation. She's quite famous in Chinese. She's rather famous in Chinese, and we were putting together her biography for a literary festival. And she and I wanted to say that she, although she's fluent in English, she writes creatively in Chinese. And she said, well, she said, that's not very writerly. And I said, well, she said, I want people to know me as a writer, and here are my awards and this, that, and the other. And I said, well, the more famous you become, your fans are going to, your readers are going to want to know you as a person.
Yes.
And of course, Louis, you've written to the Times, recently. And so, what do you think about that? I mean, have you had any stalker fans? Do you want one?
Stalker fans? I did have one. Oh, can I just finish what I was saying before, though?
Yes.
My principal problem with the European Union is that it's not a cultural or diplomatic club at all. It suffers from a terrible lack of democracy. The point I was going to make was that you don't go through two world wars for the sake of democracy, just to hand it over, just to leave it to people who aren't elected. But to get back to your question, Kelly, I have had stalkers and people who were a bit of a nuisance. I mean, one in particular, she used to send me boxes of presents, peculiar presents. I mean, weird things, but there was always a really nice bottle of wine in there.
Uh-huh.
And I decided, okay, well, I can put up with this for the sake of the wine. But then she started turning up at my door, with a fairly obnoxious little dog in tow. My cat didn't approve of that at all. In the end, I had to write her and say, look, this has got to stop, or I'll have to take steps.
Right, but could you keep sending the wine?
Well, obviously the boxes came to an end.
So we have a question, Louis, from one of the audience, Caroline de Bertadono. Did you, please pardon me, I mangled that. Did you write about the Second World War because of your family, or to speak for so many everyday forgotten people who defined that time, like who suffered immeasurably afterwards, alone, struggling in city streets, she says, haunted and often committing suicide, to give them a voice?
I think that if one has a mission like that, it's usually subconscious. But my real mission is to tell a good story.
Mhm.
And in telling a good story, all of these other things have to come into consideration. And I think I do actually. I think this person is probably right. I do want to rescue witness from the past. It's important that we don't just let the generations wither away and disappear without any kind of memorial at all. It's that's what, in a way, if we let that happen, it's as if we're aborting the experience of the human race, and it's no further use to us. I certainly have a very strong sense of family. You know, I think I know my family history almost back to 1066. And it's this feeling of continuity, which gives one the feeling of being at home in the world, and the feeling that one has the right to be here, that you're not just superfluous and pointless, like the existentialist hero, who I used to like so much. Does that answer the question?
I think it does. I mean, you know, this is one of, as we were saying, that the theme, one of the themes in your book, you know, the all for nothing, that Daniel in South Africa in the autumn of the 80s is another achingly well-observed interlude, and it's a contemplative chapter, because you're again remarking on the theme of deaths, you know, due to war, and you say what was won by all those deaths was always ephemeral.
Yeah, that's true. If you think about the case of South Africa, there were two independent sort of Boer states, the Orange Free State and Natal, and the war was with those two provinces. And you know, I think there were at least two Boer wars, possibly three. And in the end, of course, South Africa became independent. They instituted apartheid, which is something the British never would have done. And it is all those deaths and all those years of effort just were wasted, really, because you gave the place back to people who were going to turn it into a hellhole.
Matthew, Lise, would you want to ask any questions? I think, any more questions? Matthew?
I've got a fairly sort of bit of a writing nerd, and I think your work is so beautiful in the language you're using and your choice of words, as some of the extracts this evening. And I'm just pondering. It's not quite a formed question in my mind, but obviously I know you've had a very creative relationship in terms of with Gabriel Garcia Marquez and a lot of the Latin American writers, and I'm wondering exactly how you're weaving in that kind of magical realism into your work. It's almost through the words and not through the kind of implied magic that you. I haven't, as I say, I haven't quite formulated a question, but I'd love to know more about that influence on your work and how you have developed that influence.
Well, this is a huge question. When I first came across the Latin American version of magic realism, I found it extremely liberating, and because they wrote stories in which anything could happen. So somebody could suddenly ascend into heaven, taking the washing with them, you know, or blood might run uphill. So I found that's very liberating. And although in the end, after my first three novels, I suddenly got bored with magic realism. What I kept was this love of freedom. And I found, you know, in your creativity. So I got quite interested in modern and postmodern literary theory, especially the postmodern theory, where basically the idea is that our sense of reality is constructed out of fragments. And whether that's true philosophically or not, I don't mind. It's really handy if you're a writer, because it means that you can write a novel where one chapter is a letter, another chapter is somebody talking to themselves in the bathroom, another chapter is written as the omniscient author. You have a tremendous amount of scope and freedom if you choose to take it. I've hardly ever written a linear narrative. I get bored, and if I'm bored, then the reader will be too. So I keep myself entertained by writing in this very fragmented way. I write novels which are collages or mosaics, and that's how they eventually make sense in the way that a collage does. I gave up magic realism as a narrative device because in the end it started to feel like cheating. I wanted proper plots. What I kept from Marquez, I think, was this great pleasure in the language. I'm told that if he came across a word he'd never used before, he'd stick it on the fridge to remind himself to use it. You know, I'm a bit like that. Somebody gives me a really good word, I'll have to write a chapter to accommodate it. As I've got older, my style has greatly simplified, which I think happens to a great many writers. So my writing isn't nearly as dense and exotic as it used to be. But in the novel I'm writing now, I'm actually going back to magic realism a little bit. There's a ghost in it who sort of becomes part of everybody's lives. And that's because my trilogy, my family saga, was so sensible that now I want to do something a bit weird. Does that all make sense?
Speaking of, talking about vocabulary, I did write down for this event that my vocabulary increased just by reading Autumn of the Ace. I think it was only that one so far that I've picked these words from. So flensed, it's a great word, flensed, the whales were flensed. And then polyetic, fulmen, lancinating. I love that word, it's almost onomatopoeic, isn't it? Lancinating means a stabbing pain, a sword, an expanse of short grass. Pardon me if everybody else knows what these words mean. Hypnagogic, I love that word too, relating to the state of immediately before falling asleep. And then scopophilia, I love that word as well, right?
Yeah.
So I have a question here, Louis, from one of the people in the one of the readers in the audience, Meta Plimmer. I am very moved by the sentimentalism in your writing. Are you a romantic man? I think you are, Louis. I can't help wondering what a book written between you and Victoria Hislop would be like. So are you a romantic man?
Gosh, well, Victoria, I sent my poetry to Victoria. She's my first reader when I write a poem. And also to her friend Sofka Zinoviev, who's also got that Greek connection. Victoria is much better at plot than I am. She's I think probably better at character. But she doesn't. I think my style is probably better. That's the one thing that's the one thing I've got over on Victoria. So I like that idea tremendously, that if Victoria came up with the characters and the plot, I could go through it, tarting up putting in some posh words, couldn't I? But I am at least, I'm 66 now. I'm probably too old to be romantic, but
oh no, Louis, don't say that.
But I do have. I think I've always had a very romantic disposition. For example, suffering too much when dumped and that kind of thing. I think the correct attitude to being dumped is, oh, well, sod you then, and off you go. But of course, I would agonize for 3 or 4 years when I was dumped, and so it was. I found all that stuff very painful. But it was good research. Put it that way.
I have another question from the audience, from the reader. Sorry, I think it's, if you don't hurt after a breakup, then you didn't really love the person, did you? I think it's, have you ever experienced, this is Rachel James, have you ever experienced writer's block? And if so, how did you unlock it?
I don't believe in writer's block because I've got a very good way out of it, which is that if I can't write, I don't bother. Elizabeth Jane Howard used to spend all morning sitting in front of her typewriter in a state of agony, and I said, Jane, why don't you just go shopping? If that happened to me, I'd just go out and play golf or something. And I've only ever written when I feel like it. And I have written just as much, I think, as other writers who say that they write every morning. Like my friend Esther Freud says, you know, she starts at what, 9 o'clock or something, and she works till lunchtime. And I actually don't believe her. I think the writers who say that kind of thing are liars. They just want to make it look like a proper job, but it isn't a proper job at all. I hardly ever write against a deadline.
Mm.
And luckily, because I have an obsessive nature, this is the thing you need to know about me, is that I'm obsessive. If I get my teeth stuck into something, I'm like a bull terrier. I don't let go until I'm ready to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can get stuck into a piece of work and keep going 6 months solid, you know. But then I might have 6 months being obsessed with something else altogether, like doing the garden.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does it bother you, Louis? I've got one. Did you meet Bertrand Russell on a train?
No, I wish I had. Bertrand Russell used to be one of my heroes, and I think I've read almost every word that he ever wrote.
Mm-hmm.
There are very few philosophers who write beautifully and clearly.
Mm-hmm.
I can only really think of three: Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and Bertrand Russell.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved him for his clarity. Schopenhauer had a metaphor for philosophical writing. He said it should be like a Swiss lake, you know, so deep that its clarity is a function of its depth.
Mm-hmm.
But Bertrand Russell was a very liberating influence on me when I was young, because, for example, he wrote a very important book called Why I'm Not a Christian. And at a time of religious crisis in my own life, it's just summed up for me why I couldn't be a Christian anymore. You know, so philosophers often don't have much of a personal influence on the way people think and believe, but he certainly did with me. And I feel as though I have been on a railway carriage with him. You know, but I knew an old lady who used to knock around the Bloomsbury group, and she said that Bertrand Russell was always miserable. Which is ironic for somebody who wrote a book called The Conquest of Happiness.
Yeah, you have this in your books that about meeting Bertrand Russell on the train. Speaking of the Bloomsbury group, Louis, what about Christabel and Gaskell? What or whom inspired their names? These are two characters in Autumn of the Ace and the trilogy.
I don't know who inspired the name Christabel.
Mm-hmm. That's that Ludwig Coleridge poem.
Oh yes, you're right. There is a Coleridge poem. But with Gaskell, my character Gaskell, she's actually based on Radcliffe Hall, who wrote a very important, the first ever, I think, important novel about lesbian love called The Well of Loneliness. She wrote another novel called Adam's Breed. She's rather scorned by modern feminists because they don't understand what it was like being a lesbian back then. She kept losing her lovers because they wanted to have babies, right? They would leave her to get married and have babies because the only way you could have a baby was to get married. And let's face it, most people do want children. So she had her heart broken over and over. She dressed as a man. She called herself John, right? And so I decided that Gaskell was going to be basically like Radcliffe Hall, but she and Christabel would find a way around the baby problem, which they do. They find a good way around the baby problem, so they can stay together and still be parents. And I called her Gaskell really in honor of the novelist. It was just a little say hello to that one. That's all.
Yeah,
you never find out what her surname is.
No,
she's just Gaskell all the way through.
I'm obsessing now over Norfolk jackets because that's what she wears, and I want you or Pranvera to tell me where the best outfitters is to buy one. So I don't want to, Matthew and Lisa, do you want to ask? Matthew, I see you kind of.
I've got plenty, yeah, but I think it's Lisa, if you want to go, please don't. I'm just quick off the mute button.
No, I'm good. I'm just really enjoying listening, actually. Thank you.
Have you forgiven me about Brexit, Lisa?
Sorry?
Have you forgiven me about Brexit?
No, completely. No, it was a genuine question, and coming from a genuine interest, because, as I said, I think there's a great deal of empathy among your readers about, your feelings toward the intergenerational trauma of war. That you kind of arrived in a place about Europe that I think creates, or certainly among my friends, creates question marks, and it's sort of, it comes from a genuine interest as to how we could sort of share an empathy but land in a different place when it comes to that.
Well, because
and the other thing I wanted to add, oh sorry, no, you go.
Yeah, no, it's just because there's a difference between culture and politics and economics.
Yes, that's
all it is. Culturally speaking, I'm totally European and totally in love with Europe. I'm just not in love with Brussels. That's all. It's very simple. What was your next question?
No, it wasn't a question. I was really pleased. I'm not that much younger than you, and it was lovely to hear you admit to being a romantic, because I think I must be one of the billions and billions and billions of people on Earth who had a reading from Captain Corelli's Captain Corelli at my wedding. My poor son is actually in the background here and cringing with embarrassment that I should bring this up. But I wonder, actually, I will turn this into a question. Do you ever get sick of people? Does it ever become a cliche to you, or are you actually just really happy at what it became and what it led to?
You mean that particular passage?
That particular passage, and just the fact that it's so, I mean, it's become almost a part of the fabric of marriage.
Yeah. So somebody asked me recently, what's it like to have rewritten the marriage service? And I've even had to read that passage myself at a wedding of a daughter of a friend of mine. And that was a strange feeling.
Yeah.
Feeling like I was the vicar. And I've always felt it's a little bit ironic as well, because I have often seen that kind of love where people grow together and just become so much a part of each other that they cannot even conceive of being separated. You know what I mean? My little sister had it with her husband, so I've seen it very closely, but it's quite rare. And the truth is, I've never had it myself. I've only written about it from observing other people having it. And that's actually a little bit tragic if you think about it, or ironic. What?
There's still time.
There is still time. Yes, of course there is. Yeah.
I've got another question here from the audience. Your book is a great story about the other. When Daniel goes to India with Archie, this is so clear about his attitude to the family he stays with, the affinity. And this is a great interlude in this book, as I totally agree. The same in the US and Canada. The people he meets there on the road or met there, I was really impressed, she says, Joanna Hansen, Joswig, pardon my pronunciation. I was really impressed by the story of Zarif and the cross. Did you mean to stress this interhuman affinity, or was it just part of the narrative?
I have a theory that we humans are basically the same all over the world. So, for example, we all suffer from jealousy. We all feel love. We all have a sense of honor and a sense of shame. But what's different about us is the way that these emotions and these feelings and so on are processed by the culture we've inherited. So an Arab woman would express her grief in a totally different way from the way I would express my grief. It's an equal amount of grief, but a completely different way of expressing it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So an Arab woman might do, the adulation and the sort of tearing her clothes and stuff. And I might go to the bottom of the garden and just, sit on my own with my head in my hands. You know, it's the same amount of grief. It's just a different way of doing it. And my feeling about the other is that you've always got to find the way to the human being in there who's the same as you by understanding the way that they have been made what they are. So, and I've always been interested in other cultures and other ways of life. And right up until fairly recently, I actually felt more at home abroad than I ever did here in Britain. I spent a year in South America when I was 18. And it literally took me, I think, 2 decades to feel I was British again. Because I had been so sort of, I'd soaked up so much of this Latin Americanness that I found being British hard to take. Does that answer the question at all? The point is that this character who sort of stole the cross and then decided to give it back, he has the same sorts of impulses about honor as someone from a different culture altogether, but just expressed in his own way.
We have 5 minutes to go. I would like, Matthew, I know you've got lots of questions. Please, why don't you ask another question, would you?
Well, I can do. It's quite a big one. I was interested, as you were mentioning, Louis, the reference to Bertrand Russell. Obviously, he's a famous. He's, in addition to his philosophy, he's a sort of mathematician as well. And he thought reality can be distilled into logical principles. And you also mentioned the kind of postmodern influences as well. And your discussion made me think a lot of The Name with the Rose, you know, and these kind of intertextual novels. And I was wondering, between those two kind of philosophical sides to the coin, where you might situate your own philosophy throughout your novels, and if indeed there is one that links the novels.
Good question.
Well, we've got a problem here with the ambiguity of the word philosophy. Are you asking me about my philosophy of what it means to live, or are you asking me about my theory of knowledge, or, you know, epistemology, or what I think the basis of morality is? They are linked, of course. Yeah.
I think I'd leave it for your interpretation, really. But what I was meaning, but please choose a different interpretation if you prefer. But what I was meaning was really your I guess what they might call the ontology, right? So it's your sense of what.
Oh, my sense of what there is.
Yeah.
My sense of what there is. Gracious me. Are you familiar with Immanuel Kant? Well, I would say I'm closest to him and Schopenhauer when it comes to epistemology or this. But as far as ontology goes, I'm rather skeptical that one can know, or that it's even possible to know. So I get very impatient with atheists because I think they're just as arrogant and stupid as believers. Do you know what I mean? I think there are certain things which you simply cannot know, and this was the lesson that Kant left us with, that we can't know the thing in itself. We can't know ultimate reality. We can only sort of guess at it. And we all have this vague hope that maybe we'll be illuminated after we die, perhaps if there's such a thing as immortality. And I do, for example, suspect that we survive death in some form, but I can't prove it. I can't possibly say I know it. And if I don't survive death, I won't be too disappointed, because it'd just be like deep sleep, which is what I have every night anyway. Do you follow me? As far as philosophy, I agree with Socrates. You know, the important thing is to understand how little you know. If you do understand that, I think it probably makes you less arrogant. There's a lot that's bad about certainty. It's people suffering from certainties who cause a lot of the problems in the world. So, isn't it? It's religious fanatics. They suffer from certainty. Adolf Hitler was certain about the superiority of the German race. It's these people with certainty, this lack of intellectual modesty, who cause us all our problems. Is does that give you an insight into how
Yeah,
I feel?
thank you. I was wondering what the linking thread was, sort of from that kind of worldview through your work, and I think that really answers. Not to say the characters have the same worldview, right? So it's more the
Oh no, it's
yeah.
very important to have characters who you don't agree with. So I no longer have any religion, but a lot of people do. And so I always have religious people in my novels. I mean, quite often, in the most recent book, Rosie is very religious, and there's a military chaplain called Fairhead, who's also obviously very religious. You have to have people in there you disagree with, you know. So if you're a conservative writer, well, you've got to have Marxists in there, please. Otherwise, it's simply you're not. Otherwise, that world won't be real. You can't create a little world where everybody thinks and feels the same. That'd be an incredibly boring book, wouldn't it?
Thank you very
much.
And
I like the way that, for example, Fairhead has little discussions with Daniel Pitt about religion, even though they're not really coming from the same place. Or Daniel's total impatience with Rosie, because everything has to be referred to what it says in the Bible, and with him, nothing is. You know, that's a good way of generating story.
And Fairhead, you know, expresses his doubts as well, doesn't he, about his faith?
Yes, Fairhead, he gets that attitude from a Roman Catholic priest I knew, Father Anthony Such, who was quite well known for a long time. And Anthony became a friend of mine, and I was puzzled as to how he believed, or why he believed all these Christian beliefs, which I have abandoned. And he said it's not Christianity that I love, it's my version of it. So he kept his own version of his faith, and that's what Fairhead does. He keeps his own version of his faith, because to him his life would be difficult to conduct in any other way.
Well, Louis, I think we're out of time. I can say that what I am very certain that I do know that we've had a really wonderful evening with you, and really feel honored that you were our first guest on Pranvera's book night. Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to know that you're writing another novel.
Yes, I'm really enjoying it.
And I can't wait. I hope everyone buys the entire trilogy and, you know, sends it to all their friends and family. It's just really, really beautiful. And I can't wait to finish reading it myself. And can I thank Pranvera for coming up with this fantastic idea. And again, I urge everybody to look on the Frontline website and go to the club and have dinner there and you know, come to more events. And thank you, Matthew and Lisa and all of the audience who've tuned in from elsewhere in the world. And we look forward to seeing you. Our next book club is the 15th of the 18th of, or the 15th to 18th of March. You want to check the website. Sorry, I should have had that written down. And it's with Elif Shafak. So, Louis, thank you very much again.
Thank you, Kelly. Namaste.
Namaste, darlings.
Namaste. Thank you very much. Great to meet you, Louis. Thank you. And you too, Kelly. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
And goodbye from Podge.
Bye, Podge.